Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Macquarie University's Master of Research webinar. My name's Professor Nick Mansfield. I'm the Dean of Higher Degree Research here at Macquarie, and one of my responsibilities is oversight of the academic content and design of the Bachelor of Philosophy Master of Research program. So what we're going to do tonight is I'll do a short presentation which will take you through a broad outline of what the degree is, and some core information about its structure, about fees and scholarships, about its relationship to our other degree programs. And then afterwards there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. So you can submit your questions while I'm talking, but I won't get around to answering them until after I've gone through the presentation. And Sally and Joanna are also here who are able to answer some of your questions via text. I'll give you an email address also that is a place that you can send any questions that you have after tonight's session. That's postgraduate@mq.edu.au, and they'll forward any questions to the relevant people. So if issues arise for you, something you didn't clearly understand while I was talking, or something you wished you'd asked but forgot to during the course of the session, you can always send it on to that email address, and they'll be able to organise a reply for you. Okay, so let's start by just talking a little bit about the Bachelor of Philosophy, Master of Research. The first thing I want to talk about is its situation in relation to other degree programs in Australia. Traditionally, if people wanted to move on from undergraduate study into the Doctor of Philosophy program, into higher degree research programs, they normally undertook a 1 year, a fourth undergraduate year called the honours year. And that's still the practice at many Australian universities. But Australia's really out of step with almost every other jurisdiction around the world. In every other country, you do a much more substantial transition between undergraduate coursework and research training degrees like the PhD. And so Macquarie decided that what it would do would be the first Australian university to break from the pack of normal Australian practice and replace its honours program with a 2-year fully fledged research master's program. The idea behind that was that it would provide a much better and more solid preparation for people going on into doing PhDs. And it's clear from the candidates that we've got who have used the MRES as their starting point for research training that is the case, that they feel much more confident and much better prepared when they go on. Last year, the Australian government commissioned a review of research training in Australia undertaken by the Australian College of Learned Academies, so it's called the ACOLA Review. And one of the findings of the ACOLA Review was that it would be highly desirable for all Australian universities to adopt the model that Macquarie is using. And in fact, they identified what they called the Macquarie model of the Masters of Research program as the most innovative pathway in Australia for people moving on from undergraduate into PhD. So Macquarie decided to make this move for very solidly academic reasons. Its main aim was to give students a much stronger and much better preparation before they went on into the very demanding rigours of a postgraduate research degree. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the structure of the degree and its nature. Now, because it was an innovative and unusual program, Macquarie had to navigate through a whole series of legislation and regulations that set up behind Australian university degrees. And so the degree is actually offered in two forms, one for domestic candidates and one for international candidates. And that's why you hear it often described as the Bachelor of Philosophy, Master of Research. That's how it's known for domestic Australian candidates. And that's simply the result of the way degrees are funded in Australia. The first year of the program for domestic Australian students is funded on the Commonwealth Supported Places program, which is exactly the same, the HEC system, the one that funds all coursework programs at undergraduate level. The second year of the program is funded completely differently. It's funded like a PhD is, and that's on the government's research training program, the RTP. So for domestic candidates, for Australian candidates in the second year of the program, they don't accrue a HECS liability and they don't pay fees. For international students, the situation is different. They're not funded according to either of those schemes, so they tend to pay fees, and the program is known simply as the 2-year MRes for them. So the difference is largely administrative. Both cohorts of students have exactly the same experience in exactly the same classes. It's just for administrative reasons the degrees have to be given these slightly different names. Okay, well this slide presents a map of how the MRes fits into the structure of degree programs. So there are 3 stages in degree programs in almost all universities around the world. It's what they call in European countries the 3 cycles. So the first cycle is the bachelor's degree, moving on to the master's degree, and finally to the research training degrees, the Master of Philosophy, and the big one that most Australian students do, the PhD. At Macquarie, in order to move on into a higher degree by research, PhD or Master of Philosophy, you have to go via the Master of Research pathway. So if you've done a bachelor's degree or if you've done a master's by coursework, a master's by coursework is defined as one that has a research component of less than 25%, then you have to do part or all of the Master of 2-year Bachelor of Philosophy, Master of Research in order to progress on into the PhD. If you've done, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, if you've done an honours degree or you've completed a Master of Coursework, you usually don't have to do the whole of the 2-year program. You can be given credit up to 1 full year in the program, and in many cases people go on into the 2nd year of the program. Okay, so the structure, what you'll actually be studying while you're here. The first year of the program involves 8 units. It's at the same level as honours. So it is the government recognises it as the equivalent of an honours program at level 8 on the Australian Qualifications Framework. What you'll undertake during that year are 8 units. But the inflection of the units is very much towards research training and preparing you for research. So you'll do a unit in research communications that from next year will be taught at the faculty level. You'll do a unit called Research Frontiers, which is about finding out what the latest developments, controversies, issues are in research in your chosen area, so that you really know where the action is when you start to design what your own research is going to be about. And then you do 6 other coursework units. And they have a variety of focuses depending on what department or faculty you're enrolled in. And some of them will have a strong research inflection. Some of them will be giving you a much deeper grounding in the academic content of your particular area. But the focus is all about preparing you to undertake research, to know more about your area, and also to know how to undertake research and what the latest developments are in research. The 2nd year of the program is much more research heavy, and its focus of the program is, the 2nd year is the completion of a 20,000 word thesis. Slight variation in some disciplines, but the main standard, the basic standard is a 20,000 word thesis. Now you also undertake 4 other activities, but each of them is designed to feed into your individual research project. So you'll do another session that we call Research Frontiers 2. Like the Research Frontiers unit that you've done in the 1st year, it'll be focused, however, much more on the subdisciplinary area, the very specific background behind the research project that you want to investigate. You'll also be given some induction into how to undertake a literature review, how to respond to the literature in your particular disciplinary area, what research methods are most appropriate to your particular project, and also you'll be given some training in research planning and project management. Now, all of those activities are really designed just to strengthen your preparation for the actual research project that you undertake. Now, that's a project that you design yourself in collaboration or in consultation with people in your academic department, but the main aim is for you to start thinking about what kind of specific research topics are really your passion that you want to investigate in some detail and that you might want to go on and do in your PhD. The admission requirements into the program, Macquarie's just recently converted to a 7-point GPA scale from a 4.1. So the GPA benchmark cutoff that we're using for admissions is a 4.38 on a 7-point scale and at least 5.25 at 300 level, 300 level being the final year of the undergraduate program, the final level, the top level of undergraduate programs at Macquarie. Overall, at 300 level, that's the equivalent of a credit average, and we award credits for gaining a score of 65 or higher. So the overall GPA is slightly less, but the GPA at that top level, the one immediately before admission into the program, is slightly higher. Now, there is some disciplinary variation, so it's always worth you having a look on the website of the department that you'd be interested in enrolling in, because some areas have a slightly higher requirement, and some also have other requirements as well. For example, they might want you to look at other types of work, a creative portfolio, for example. Now, for people who want to gain admission directly into the second year and want to be given credit for the first year, if you've completed a master's by coursework, which, as I said before, is usually a master's where you've done less than 25% on a research project, or if you've completed an honours program, either at Macquarie in the past or somewhere else, your track record will be assessed in order to determine how much credit you will be given towards your degree. And a lot of students will be given a full year's credit and be able to go directly into the second year of the MRes. In other words, to go straight into the research phase of the program before they, and that gives them a much more solid research preparation before they go on into the PhD. Now, Macquarie is also the biggest player in the Australian university sector in what we call co-tutel and joint PhDs. Co-tutel is a French word used to describe a program that's taught between more than two or more institutions. So co-tutel, under a co-tutel PhD or a joint PhD, they're very similar. You enroll in two universities simultaneously. You do one PhD, but you get the degree from both of those universities. And we strongly encourage our PhD candidates to undertake such a co-tutel or joint PhD. But in order to prepare them to do that, we also offer exchange programs at the MRes level. And we like the idea of students in the first year going and taking some courses at an overseas partner institution, or in the second year spending a short time in a lab or at a research institute where their kind of research is being undertaken. Now, the aim is not only to give them a really rich experience of studying overseas, but also to hopefully build the networks and relationships that will encourage them to go on to do a co-tutel or joint PhD later down the track when they're doing more fully fledged research training. Okay, so a little bit about the fees and scholarships. For domestic students, first of all, and as I mentioned earlier, the situation is different between domestic and international candidates. So for domestic students in the first year of the program, what's known as the Bachelor of Philosophy year, the BPhil year, you accrue a HECS liability just as you have through your undergraduate degree on the Commonwealth Supported Places Scheme. And you're awarded, all domestic candidates who are enrolled at the HECS census date, which is at the end of March, are granted a $4,000 stipend. That's in the first session. If they maintain their performance through session one, then they're given a second $4,000 stipend at the HECS census date in August as well. And that's only for domestic candidates and only for full-time candidates. So that's in order to provide you, it's not a huge living allowance, but it's in order to save you a bit of time that you might be spending otherwise undertaking work to support yourself. It would certainly reduce the amount of work that you'd have to do and time that you'd have away from your study. We really want you, it's a demanding program, and we really want you to concentrate on your study so you get the most out of it. Second year of the program, as I mentioned earlier, is funded by the Australian Government's Research Training Program, the RTP. So domestic candidates don't accrue any liability, either at HECS, they don't pay fees. And there are a significant number of scholarships, some awarded by the awarded by the university on a competitive basis to domestic candidates in the second year, and that's a higher scholarship. It's at the base Australian Government Postgraduate Research Award rate, which is currently $27,000. It's indexed and tax-free. But they're awarded to top-performing students on a competitive basis. Now, as I mentioned, the situation for international students is slightly different. International students are in the two-year Master of Research program entirely. They're not subject to the complex funding arrangements that that underlie domestic candidature. So international MRes students on the whole pay tuition fees. Now, it is possible, however, in the second year of the MRes, and especially for candidates coming into the second year of the MRes, to get a bundled offer of a scholarship for that second year, plus for 3 years of the PhD, so a 4-year scholarship package. To maintain the scholarship, it does depend on your performance in the second year of the MRes, but in its entirety, it amounts to a possible 4-year funding package. And Macquarie also collaborates with a large number of international funding agencies. There are a huge number of funding agencies, mostly government-run in different countries around the world. And Macquarie's negotiated with many of them in order to ensure that they recognise the second year of the MRes at least, and in some cases the first year as well, as an appropriate degree for students from their countries to attain scholarships. There's a list there. I won't go through all of them, but probably the most prominent would be the China Scholarship Council. The Endeavour Scholarship is an Australian government one, but there's also a large number from other countries, from Kazakhstan, Mexico, Chile, VIED in Vietnam, and so on. There's a complete list available on our website. Finally, after you complete the MRes, now as I mentioned at the outset, the aim of the MRes is to give you a much better preparation for people for going on into a PhD. And it really arose because there was a problem with people undertaking the PhD. They took an inordinately long time to complete. A lot of students dropped out, and a lot of students became kind of disoriented and unhappy. And that wasn't only a problem at Macquarie, it's a problem across the Australian sector. It's actually a problem around the world, that people are taking inordinately long to complete PhDs and are not especially happy while they're doing it. And what Macquarie thought was the problem really is that people are not well enough prepared when they're admitted. And so our focus in the program was really to give people a much better preparation. And so they would also begin the project that they started in 2017 that would prepare them begin the project in the second year of the MRes that would go on to become the research topic that they did in their PhD. So by the time they actually enrolled in their PhDs, they would be much better prepared than students had been in the past. And on the whole, we found that many students and supervisors report that is the case. Okay, so in order to advance into the PhD, you need to have completed an MRes or an MPhil, but in order to get into an MPhil, you need to have done an MRes. If you've completed the MRes with a score of 75 or above in the second year, and 90% of that score is determined by the evaluation of your thesis by external examiners, then you'll gain automatic entry into the PhD if there is a supervisor available in your particular area. But you'll know that by the time you complete your project in the second year. Now, from 2018 onwards, there'll be a large number of scholarships awarded competitively for students in the second year of the MRes and going on into PhD. Okay, finally, some application details. This is the second of our webinars for this year, and the previous one was prior to the application date for international candidates, which is now closed. So the next applications for international candidates will open in May, with a deadline in the middle of the year. But the applications for domestic candidates under the research training program are still open and will be open until the 31st of October. And there's the address on the Macquarie website for where you find the information about how to apply. Okay, and that's it, which gives me, means now that we're ready to go with questions. Okay. And our first question is from Santosh. I have completed Masters of Management for Engineers from Central Queensland University. Will I be eligible to get some credit? Each individual person applying has their specific background assessed, but on the whole, if you've done a master's degree, you would be certainly given some credit, up to a full year's credit. Just depends on the engineering school. They'll have a look at exactly what you've done and trying to work out how good a preparation it is for research training and how far it's taken you down the track. So their interest will be very much in just getting a good sense of what you've done. But it's very common for people who've done a master's degree to be given up to a year's credit. That's the maximum that you can be given. The next question's from Ken. I've been told that this is not available for external students. That's not actually the case. It depends a little bit on the department that you're in, but the program is available for external candidates, but not every particular unit in the program is available externally. There are over 200 units in the program. That's something actually I should have mentioned before. And it is possible to put together a program subject to academic advice and approval. It is possible to put together a program from different units across the university, as long as you have the background in order to study them. And so it is possible to put together an external program, definitely. But in any particular area, maybe not all of the units would be available to external students. Some people do a combination, but certainly it's available externally, yes. The next question's from Jennifer. I'm not quite sure. You've finished a master's degree, is that right? And you're not sure how to go about it. Basically, if you apply, you'll include all the information about the prior study that you have done, and an assessment will be made firstly in the central office, but then in the faculty as well, about your background and how much credit you'd be given towards the program. Okay. Another question from Santosh. The 4-year bundle, is it available for domestic students along with scholarship? For domestic students, the situation is slightly different. What happens is that on a competitive basis, people going into the second year of the MRes are awarded scholarships according to the number of scholarships that are available, and then there is an allocation of scholarships for students completing the MRes, and they're also awarded on a competitive basis. So the highest performing domestic candidates in the second year of the MRes are awarded scholarships for a 3-year PhD. It's exactly the same situation really as international students. It's the possibility of having a 1+3, but it's not presented and offered in quite the same way as a 4-year bundle, just straight away on admission. It's a little bit more flexible for domestic candidates. Okay, the next question's from Michael. Hi Nick, I finished my degree last year. Will my application be analysed using the 4-point GPA or the 7-point GPA? My understanding is that what they'll do with if you're, they'll have access to your results and they'll convert them onto the 7-point scale. So basically everyone is on the same playing field. So your GPA would be recalculated on the 7-point scale in basically the same way as it was before. But the cut-offs in the 2 degrees are absolutely equivalent, so there's no advantage or disadvantage in being assessed on either scale. Okay, the next one is from Edward. I've completed a Master in International Relations and an MBA. All are coursework study, not research. Can I still start from the MRes? Again, what will happen there is that they will make an individual assessment of exactly what you've done, but there's no requirement that you have undertaken research training in your master's programs in order to get into credit into the second year. They'll just want to make sure that what you've studied in those programs is equivalent to what you would have studied if you'd undertaken the first year. So you'd definitely be given some credit into the 2-year program. And without looking at your transcript myself, it's hard for me to say how much, but it could be up to a full year if they think that you're really equipped enough to go on into the second year of the second year of the program already. And as I say, that happens in a lot of cases. That's almost the norm amongst people who've done a master's degree before or an honours degree, that they're given a year's credit. If they want to move and research into another area, then that's, they'd have to look at how deep your background was in that particular area. Okay, next question from Arvinda. I've done my master's in chemistry in India in 2004. Does the gap matter for enrolment, and will I get credit for Masters of Research? Same situation. They would look at your degree program and make an evaluation of how prepared you are. Sometimes you can get asked, and it's not just true for you, and it could be true for other applicants as well. They will want to make sure that you're prepared enough for what you'll be undertaking in the second year. So with the gap of study, there's no preclusion on that. There's no kind of hard and fast rule, but they will want to make sure that you're adequately equipped to go on into the second year of the program. Sometimes they might ask you to do a couple of units or a semester of units in order to make sure that you've got just the right background and that you're up to speed before you start to make, rather than sort of throwing you into the deep end of research straight away. But yep, there's no hard and fast rule about that time difference. But again, they'll look at each individual case separately and try and work out what's appropriate for them. Okay, the next question is from Lily, who wants to know about English language requirements. I'm a domestic student, but English is not my first language. Do I have to wait for my IELTS result for entry, or do I have another way, for example, of English language course? My understanding would be if you've done your prior degrees here in Australia as a domestic student, then you wouldn't be required to have an IELTS, to do the IELTS test. So any candidate who's undertaken a degree, I think there are 5 or 6 countries, obviously Australia, but the UK, the US, New Zealand, there's one more I've forgotten, Canada, I think. If you've undertaken a degree in those countries in English, then you don't need to undertake an IELTS test in order to be admitted. On the other hand, if you were seeking to do some English training courses in preparation, I'd ask you to have a look on the Macquarie website about what English training courses are available. I'm not sure if I've got the most up-to-date information about that. I mean, some people like with all of these programs, it's really important to be as well prepared as possible before you actually formally enroll. So if you are anxious about language as an issue, then it might be worth looking into what's available in English language training courses before you actually enrol. But if you've been successful at in an Australian institution with an undergraduate degree, certainly at the level at which you need to do, it's not just the pass level that we're administering, we're requiring people to have performed closer to a credit level before they're admitted to the BPhil MRes. If you've had that level of success, you're unlikely to have any troubles enrolling in the degree. Okay. The next question is from Vanessa. Is scholarship money only available to full-time students or part-time too? There is a provision for scholarships to be available for part-time candidates, but usually it's by application. So they tend to be the ability to get a part-time stipend is usually reserved for people who have significant care responsibilities, parents of very young children, for example, or for people with long-term chronic health conditions or disabilities that might make it difficult for them to commit to full-time study. But the norm is, the basic requirement is that it's for people undertaking full-time people undertaking full-time study. Okay, next question is from Mark. I have quite a busy full-time job. Can the MRes and PhD be completed part-time? They can, that's right. Both of those programs can be undertaken part-time, and a significant number of students in both programs, especially in the PhD, getting upwards of 30% of our candidates are undertaking the degree part-time. So that's not an unusual choice. We do rely on you to make a really sober judgment about how prepared you are for for taking on a degree as well as a busy job. So for example, and this is the university policy across its coursework units as well, we don't like people to ask for special consideration because they've been overcommitted at work. We expect people to have made a judgment, to have only have enrolled in a degree where they know that they have the capacity to do it. Okay, next question's from Danielle. If you want to pursue research in an area that is not in the same area as your undergrad, is it possible to enter the MRes? If not, is there a bridging component, or is it assessed per department requirements? That's a really good question, and it is possible technically to change areas, and we've had a large number of people who have actually done that. And what happens is they will make a specific, the department in which you want to enroll will make an assessment. They'll look closely at your track record in research, your track record in study, and judge exactly how appropriate it is for admission to this degree. And they might ask you to do some other units beforehand. But it's quite common for people, say, who've done a degree in education, to move across and do a degree in sociology or even psychology, for example, because they've done a little bit of that already in the background of their program. So it is possible, but again, it's looked at on a case-by-case basis. We really want to make the program available to people, and we know that it's common for people to shift emphasis and direction as they work through a program. So yeah, that is certainly available, but we don't want people to be thrown into a program with students who've got a deep background in a certain subject area when those students aren't really familiar with the language that's being used, they don't know the basics and whatever. So they'll just make an assessment about how well prepared you are for the program, but certainly it's possible. Okay, Natalie asks, I'm finishing my undergrad this year and thinking about applying to go into the MRes. I'm still not 100% sure what I would like to base my research on. Once you apply with a selected supervisor and research proposal, is there room for changing it in the first year? Absolutely. Really, the assignment of topics and supervisors gets underway in the second session of your first year, so for full-time students. So you wouldn't be needing to pin down your topic or supervisor until, and various different faculties do it at different times, but until some time about this time of the year, about September. Got to remember, you start that research project if you're doing the 2 years in the basic way in sequence. You'd normally be starting that research program in January of your second year and submitting a thesis in October. So through the whole of the first year, you're really looking around at what's happening in the area, in the field of research, and just getting clear in your mind what your research is. So you definitely would not be expected to pin down your topic. You really wouldn't be being asked to specify what your topic's going to be in any definite terms until late in that first year, and you'd have time to change it right up until you begin in January. And even then, everybody modifies and adjusts their research project as they go. So there is quite a bit of flexibility. Clarice asks, are there other combined Master's PhD programs available at Macquarie, or is the MRes the only pathway to a PhD? The MRes is the only pathway at Macquarie into a higher degree by research. We do have other combined Master's PhD programs in psychology. Psychology is in a slightly different situation to almost every other discipline in the university, in that in order to be accredited as a psychologist in Australia, you need to undertake a 4-year program. So the honours program is still taught in psychology, and there are master's programs in different fields of psychology that combine with PhDs, but you are also expected to do a component of the MRes program at the same time. So basically, in order to get into the PhD or the Master of Philosophy, you normally have to do part or all of the BPhil MRes program. I mean, we do sometimes take candidates coming from outside the university, say people are coming, especially from overseas, who've done a degree that is like the MRes, and we often give them direct admission to the PhD. But on the whole, if you're a domestic candidate or if your experience study has been through Macquarie or another Australian university, you'll be doing it through some phase in the MRes. Okay, Mark asks, I have quite a busy full-time job. Can the MRes and PhD be completed part-time? Yep, we talked about this just a few minutes ago, and yes, they can be. But as I said then, you just have to be careful. If you do have a full-time job, just have to be careful to make sure if you take on the MRes and PhD that you do have the capacity to do it time-wise. Okay, next question's from Lalindri. Does Macquarie Uni have research around nanoscience? Because my background is in nanoscience. Yes, there are researchers in our Faculty of Science and Engineering looking at nanoscience and nanotechnology. My advice would be to go onto the Macquarie website and look at the relevant departments in science, and there'd be a few of them, from biomolecular sciences across to engineering, where people would be working in the nanoscience field. Just have a look at, and this goes for people in all fields actually, it's worth having a look at the department and the individual researchers here at Macquarie on their web pages, and you get it. They usually list all their research, the publications that they've done, the projects they're working on. There's often links to their articles that you could have a look at, and information about their teaching as well, and their backgrounds in general. So if you're interested in a particular area and trying to work out whether Macquarie has expertise in that area, just have a hunt around on department websites and you'll find a whole lot of very, very interesting stuff, and some very, very passionate and exciting people to work with. Okay, just give me 1 second. My mouth's going a bit dry. Okay, the next question's from Susan. I've finished my bachelor degree in policing studies. Which master degree should I take? Is it possible that master in research undertaken by the previous course of study? Not quite sure if I fully understand that. Now, choosing a master's degree really depends on what your long-term goals are and what your interests are. And Macquarie has a huge range of coursework master's programs. And so if your interest is in a particular area, especially if you have a strong vocational interest in that area, often those coursework master's programs are just the right thing for you. The MRes is the degree that you would need to undertake if you're going on to do a PhD, but a huge number of our candidates increasingly are not necessarily planning to do a PhD. They go into the MRes because they want to work in industry in a research capacity, and they want a degree that just shows the world that they have a strong mastery of research projects. They're good at project management. They know exactly they know exactly how to work independently to identify a problem, put in place a course of work to deal with that problem, and to come out with and communicate a solution. Increasingly, those are the kinds of skills that employers are saying they want. Creative, independent, research-led, questioning people who can communicate well. That's exactly what any research degree prepares you for. And a lot of people do the MRes simply because they want that kind of training. They want to be equipped that way in order to go out and be much more competitive in the marketplace. So have a look around, think about what your long-term goals are. If you want to go on into research, or if you're thinking about that, then you have to go via the MRes route. The MRes can be a pathway towards other things as well, and some disciplines in particular it is strongly, but there are a whole range of other coursework master's programs that might interest you if your interest is more in the in a vocational sense. For Colleen asks, please can you advise of the cost for the first year? As I mentioned earlier, the costs are different for domestic and international candidates. Fees for domestic candidates in the first year are the equivalent that you would pay for any year on a undergraduate coursework program at a university like Macquarie on the HEC scheme. So you would simply accumulate a debt like that for the first year of the program that you would have otherwise. As I mentioned earlier, the second year of the program, there's no fee requirement for Australian domestic candidates. For international candidates, the fees are there is a schedule of fees that's available on the website. I won't quote you the fees now because they vary from one program to another. The Australian government identifies different bands of cost for different programs, and the university charges fees accordingly. So some programs are more expensive than others, for example, usually according to how much money we have to spend in providing you the resources in that training area. So have a look on the website. It'll give you more exact information if you're interested in the international fees. Edward asks, do you provide any assistance or advice on the research proposal? Can I communicate directly with my future supervisor or the department I'll be studying under? Yes, Edward, you're strongly encouraged to be in contact with your department and potential supervisors. Not necessarily before you enrol in the BPhil, but certainly before you go into the second year of the program, before you start the research project. You're strongly encouraged to develop your research project in conversation with an equipped researcher in the department. They might necessarily end up being the one who's your supervisor, though it's always a very good chance. And it's really good to get their input and their feedback on exactly what you're trying to do. You have to design a research project in the second year of the MRes that you begin in January and you complete in October. So it's effectively a 9-month research project. You would have done quite a bit of the preliminary work before that starts, but at the same time, it's really important that you don't try and do too much. You don't actually come up with a project that actually will take you 5 years to do. It is something that's got to be realistic. It can be done in that time. You have the background to do it. They have the resources for you to do it. All of those things need to be worked out in negotiation with expertise in the department. Mightn't be very easy for you in your particular area to know who in the department to approach, so you can always approach the departmental MRes director. Every department has a staff member who's identified on the website as the MRes director. They also have what's called an HDR coordinator, high degree research coordinator, and you can always contact them, or even the head of department if it's a little confusing. So. And they will either help you themselves or they'll put you in touch with somebody who's got expertise in your area. Okay, next question is from April. Hello, I've completed a master's by coursework with a distinction average. What's the likelihood of getting MRes first year exemptions? The likelihood is very high, and as I say, without looking closely at exactly what you've done on the one hand and exactly what you want to do on the other hand, it's hard for me to quantify exactly what level of credit you'd be getting. But as I mentioned earlier, you could be given up to a full year's credit into the 2-year program. So if they believe that you're well enough prepared and that the courses you've done cover everything you would have done or equivalent to everything you would have done in the first year of the program, then there's a high likelihood they'll welcome you into the second year. Okay, the next question is from Clarice. I'm currently completing my honours year in psychology. Are there any benefits to undertaking an MRes instead of a master's degree in psychology? That's probably a question that depends on what particular area of psychology you want to go into. And as you know, like psychology is a vast field from the clinical at one end to organizational psychology, neuropsychology, and all kinds of different research areas. So it's probably worth you having a talk to people in the psychology department here at Macquarie and discussing with them what your long-term goals are. If your interest is in a particular area of psychology in order to go and practice, you want to go out and practice psychology as a clinician, or you want to go out into the workplace, or you want to work in other institutional settings or whatever, then it might be more appropriate for you to do some other kind of master's degree program. If you're more interested in the research side, then the MRes would be the way to go. So it's really a question of getting clear in your mind exactly where you want to head before you choose which program is going to be best for you. Having said, I mean, there is always the possibility of switching from one to another. Like if you could start in one of those programs and you could decide that actually, you're actually more interested in something else, then you can shift. And sometimes that might take you a little longer, but it's always possible to cross over. It does happen quite often, actually, that people enroll in one kind of master's program and do a small research project, get really passionate about research, and then go on to do an MRes and a PhD and become academics or professional researchers. And something that surprises them, they didn't realize that they would have quite that passion, but that's not an uncommon experience. Next question's from April. I work full-time, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Are the classes scheduled to accommodate full-time workers? Again, that'll vary from program to program. So I'd be in touch with the department or have a look on the timetable website at Macquarie and just have a word to them about what your options are. Whether it's possible sometimes classes are scheduled at times that are really amenable to people who are working full-time. Sometimes people working full-time might need to leave work early in order to get to a late afternoon class, or there could be options for external study as well, so you wouldn't have to come on campus at all and you'd be working in the evenings, doing the courses in your own time on the weekends and your own pace on the weekends and in the evenings. So again, that will vary a lot. I mean, individual courses are going to be scheduled at particular times. What you will find is if you're in an area where that's a really common situation, so there could be some areas in which it doesn't sound like you're in this situation, but say in education, people are teaching schools, they're working 9 to 3 or 9 to 4. The classes are scheduled in the late afternoon to accommodate them. It varies a lot, so I'd just have a word, consult with the department that you're working in and see what's possible. But as I mentioned earlier, external study is available in a lot of cases as well. Okay. There's a slight break in the question. How are we going for time? We've got about 10 more minutes or so to go, so please let me know if you've got any other questions now. Here's a question from Michael. Also enrolled, can one switch part-time to full-time program? Yep, it is possible to switch between part-time and full-time. That is much easier to do in the first year of the program because the first year is designed around coursework. So you can enroll in any number of units up to the maximum of 4 per semester, depending on what's most appropriate, and you can change between them. You would need to change by a certain date, otherwise you will accrue the liability to pay for a program. If you do 2/3 of it before you decide to change, you will be expected still to pay for it, but it is possible to switch from part-time to full-time. It gets a little bit more complicated when you're in the research part of the program because that's time-based rather than course-based. So you're given 9 months in order to undertake the program, and they will have to negotiate with you about how to tailor your deadline, what they call your expected work submission date, in order to make sure that everybody's on the same level playing field and being treated the same. Next question is from Elton. If you could, are you allowed to request a supervisor from another uni, provided he accepts? Look, that's actually a tricky one. It is possible for PhD candidates, but it's not really encouraged. It's much more the usual practice that you would enroll if you want to work with a particular researcher. It's much more advisable that you would go and enroll at that institution as well. You'll find that a lot of researchers at other institutions would be unlikely to take on the primary responsibility for supervising your project, largely because most academics are overworked and time poor. Their workloads are huge, and they're working 70 hours a week. If they take on you as a candidate, their home university is not going to give them any work credit for it, so it's very unlikely for them to want to take that on. They tend, though, however, to be often quite happy to be an advisor on your program, but not to take on that primary responsibility. Certainly in the PhD, it's very common for people to be enrolled here at Macquarie, for example, have their primary supervisor here, but because there's an individual somewhere else in Sydney or somewhere else in the world who has expertise in a particular area, or has access to a particular resource or equipment or whatever, that person is your associate supervisor on the program. It's very unusual, though, for them to take on that primary responsibility unless you actually go and enroll there. Okay, question from Corey. I'm currently completing my undergrad. However, I've transferred course. Will the GPA admission requirements be based on the course I graduate with, or will it also take into account the units that were transferred under RPL? My understanding would be that the assessment would be on your experience here at Macquarie. I'd have to check that up, though. It might be worth dropping a line to that email address that I mentioned earlier, which is postgraduate@mq.edu.au, or having a look at the RPL policy, which is available on the Macquarie website, would give you more exact information about exactly how they calculate your RPL. It is possible, however, if for some reason your GPA doesn't meet the benchmark, you might have started your degree in one area, found out that you really hated it and that you weren't very good at it and that you failed, and then you transfer over to another area, to study, and you have stellar performance there. But it might distort your GPA if they take into account the units that you did in the area that you weren't interested in. It is always possible to make a case, as they call it, to draw attention to that and say that you don't think that should be taken into consideration. You should really be assessed just on the subjects that are relevant to what you want to do in the BPhil MRes. Okay, question from Lily. Which date is the deadline for semester 2 2018? I do not know that question. The answer to that question, you might have to email that one in, I'm afraid. I'm not aware of what the deadlines for admissions are. Not every program welcomes candidates to begin in the middle of the year. Almost all programs, the norm is to commence at the beginning of the year. Some programs do make an exception there, but it's not really advised for people to start the first year of the program in the middle of the year. Okay, from Vanessa. Sorry, my internet cut out during the talk, so I'm not sure if this has been answered already. Is there any entry requirement to progress from year 1 to year 2, like a GPA? No, from year 1 to year 2, you simply have to pass the units in year 1. So you need to complete the units, you need basically to pass the units in year 1 in order to progress on into year 2, all of the units. So you'd need to complete 8 units successfully in order to gain admission, to gain progression from the first year into the second year. Okay, as I said, we're kind of beginning to wind up. So a question from Santosh. I'm a resident. Am I eligible for HEX help? I think HEX help is available for people undertaking the first year of the program. That's the only year that's relevant to HEX. So for domestic candidates undertaking the first year of the program, it is possible to access HEX help, is my understanding of it. Okay, question from Mohit. I've completed my postgrad from Macquarie in 2013. It was Masters by coursework. I could not complete any research-based units. Would I need to do the full 2 years for the MRes, or will I be able to get year 1 credit RPL? You will get some year 1 credit, but it will depend on the individual discipline. Some departments actually do want candidates to undertake specific units in the first year of the program, and if you haven't done any research before, they might direct you towards those units. With other candidates or with other departments, it's much more likely for them just to usher you straight into the second year of the program. But again, it's a question of them looking closely at your individual track record. And the reason they do that is they're really trying to make an assessment about how prepared you are to go on into the second year. It's not like they're punishing you or rewarding you if you've done certain things or not done certain things. What they're interested in is just making sure when you go into a demanding academic program that you're really as well equipped as everybody else in order to go on. A question from Michaels. Can I do the MRes based on my Bachelor of Psych studies? Yep, my understanding is that you would be able to, but again, it's a question of talking to people in psychology and showing them exactly what you've done. and seeing how suited they think you are to their program as well. But if you put in a submission, it would be assessed. Normally, people who've undertaken any bachelor's degree at the requisite level would be and got the GPA results that I mentioned earlier, then you would be admitted into the BPhil MRes. Elton says, can you choose the units or some units, I should say? Yes, every candidate has the option of some elective units. It does vary a little bit from faculty to faculty. It's possible for you to put together a program from different parts of across the university in a unique way that suits you. You might be doing an interdisciplinary project. That's what you might be interested in when you go on into research. So you might do, for example, you might be interested in computer games. You do some units from multimedia in the media department, which is in the Faculty of Arts. You do some units from the computing department, which is in the Faculty of Science and Engineering. So it is possible for you to put together a more bespoke program. Different faculties have different requirements, though. Every faculty has some room for electives, but some more than others. Some have a large number of electives, some are a bit more restrictive. But yes, you will have choice, because we do want you to develop your skills and knowledge in the area that's most important to you. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. I think our time is starting to wind up. That's pretty much the end of the session. That's enough from me, I think. So thanks, everybody. And as I mentioned earlier, there are other opportunities for you to follow up with questions if you didn't get a clear answer or things you don't fully understand. There's a lot of information on our website, but also if you send an email to that email address, postgraduate@mq.edu.au, they'll be able to find an answer for you. Now, you'll see on your screen a short survey in response to the question. Please stay around for a few minutes and fill that out. I'd be very grateful. Otherwise, that's all from me. Thanks, everyone, again, and good night, and hope to see you here studying at Macquarie. Bye now.